And I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, Excel and Spreadsheets on the Farm. I'm Shannon Dill, and I'm going to be facilitating and teaching this section. Again, throughout the session, we're going to be using the chat pod for any questions that you may have. Before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsors and collaborators listed here on this slide and remind you of the upcoming webinars. So we have one more left at the end of the year on 12/11, and we are working on 2020. It looks like we'll have 22 webinars coming up here next year. So we're really excited about them, a very big variety of topics. All of these webinars are recorded, and we do post those on the website. It's here in the blue link. We also have a number of upcoming events, the Women in Ag Conference, as well as Annie's project classes. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint. So today I'm going to be talking about Excel and spreadsheets on the farm. I work in farm business management and have a number of examples that we'll be showing throughout these slides that there's a number of templates available and we can have that discussion. I'm in Talbot County. I'm part of the University of Maryland Extension, and I work with the Mid-Atlantic Women in Ag program. So really to have farm profitability, and that's the goal for all producers, for all farms, you really need to have good production. So you need to be growing a very good product, and you need to be a good manager. And this time of year, as it gets chilly and maybe field work wraps up, it's time to start thinking about the data that we need, the data that needs to be reported, and all of those type of things. So really to be that good manager to operate and run the business. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the variety of farm records and how you can use Excel to help you in your farm business. You know, farms have so many records to keep. You're the grower, you're the manager, you're the marketer, you're the one managing employees. So there's lots of things to keep on the farm. They might be personal records that you need to keep. Maybe it's production-based and yield records that you're keeping. And of course, we know we need to keep financial records. And then we need those things for proof. You know, the IRS wants proof that I've purchased products or that I have interest that I have accumulated and paid. Maybe it's proof of spraying or yield records or weigh tickets. Maybe it's receipts from consumers or customers or businesses. Records really help with decision aids. So as you're looking at the end of the year, you can make some decisions by looking back and seeing where the farm spent money, where repairs were happening. Again, maybe some institutional requirements. So federal or state laws may require reporting and records to be kept. And those can be both environmental type of regulations or legal type of regulations. So managing farm records, a number of the producers that I work with often use a mix. So they may use QuickBooks for their financial record keeping, but say they use Excel for their family, or they're keeping some data in apps and different ways to keep apps. So something like gas mileage. You can use, there's a number of apps out there where you can have your phone track the number of miles you go, so you can use those on your taxes and have that information. So there's a number of ways to manage records. And what I talk to people about is that really you need to figure out what works for you, what is efficient, and what type of data that you need or want to use. So I do love Excel, and I put a lot of things in there anytime that I'm starting to create lists or I have numbers. I really like to pull up an Excel spreadsheet because I can manipulate them the way that I want. I can put that data in there and I can customize it on how I need to see it or organize it or report on it. So there's a number of ways that I love Excel. Again, that customization is really, really nice. You can insert rows, you can add the things, you can copy and paste. You can make modifications and the formulas will update, and that's really helpful. I like that you can organize multi-year data kind of into that one file, and we'll talk a little bit about terminology. But having multiple years of data, if you just keep 1 year, 1 year of a balance sheet is okay. But if you can look at how your net worth has changed over 5 years, all of a sudden you have access to a lot more data and being able to make decisions. Excel does so many calculations. I don't even know how many formulas it has out there. The one that I use most often would be sum. So I'm totaling columns. It would be counting the columns. So how many cells are open. You can do some statistics with it. So you've got your minimum, your maximum. You can run the mean, which is your average. You can do your median. You can do counts. You can make some parameters. Like I only wanted to count or sum certain things if there's criteria met. Perhaps it's a weighted average. So I've used weighted average, and I'll show an example of that. I've used that quite a bit with like green marketing, where you have bushels and an amount, and just a clear average wouldn't give you a true picture in. You need to see that weighted average. So depending on the number of bushels and the price, I wanted that weighted average. And then you can do, like, I have increased in knowledge, but you can do percentage change. And that's one thing that we use quite a bit in some of our evaluations. We use it in our budgeting, is how does it change from 1 year to another? Is it up or is it down? We use that one quite a bit with our custom rates. So if anyone has seen our custom rate surveys, we ask people, how much would you charge per acre to mow? And we'll have rates over the years. And again, year one of the data was just year one, but as we got more and more years of data, all of a sudden we can start to get a story. What's happening in the market? What's happening with custom operators? Where are the changes in the market happening? Another great way to measure that type of change is with the graphing functions. And Excel can make some pretty cool graphics. You can spend a lot of time tweaking them and changing them around. You can add titles, you can change fonts, you can change colors. But I really like it because as you build the data, all of a sudden you can get some trends and you can see some visuals. And I'll show one example. There's a visual, perhaps a trend line. You have some blips, it's really up or it's really down. So did something happen? Why was that different? Perhaps I made human error, because human error happens in Excel, and I can go back and make those changes. So I love to run a graph if I have some data just to see how it looks visually. And then a lot of your software programs, a lot of your data and your online programs will allow for a download or an upload of the data. So an example is we have the custom rate survey, and you can enter the numbers into a survey, and then I can download all that data into CSV format or a Word format. Another one is my bank. So my bank, I can log into my checking account and I can download a CSV file, which is an Excel spreadsheet. It's another name. It'll create the cells, and I can save it as an Excel document. And then all of a sudden, I can do all of this manipulation of the data and categorizing of those numbers and that financial data. So some Excel terminology that you would want to know, and there's tons of other ones out here. You can see the reference here. Windows, Microsoft has online, it has some really, really great tutorials. They've got some great templates. They're really the go-to on how to run different types of formulas. But these four terminologies we use quite a bit, and when I go through and show some examples, I'll be using this. So Excel creates, when you create a file, it's called a workbook. So within that workbook, you can have worksheets, okay? So workbook is the file. Worksheets are those tabs. And I love to do that. So an example is when I pull, say, something down on an annual basis, my balance sheet, for example, when I get my line of credit out every year for the farm, I update my balance sheet. Well, instead of creating an entirely new file, I just create a new worksheet in that workbook, and I can name it down at the bottom. So I've got a 2016 worksheet, a 2017, a 2018. You can copy those, you can rename them, you can color code them, but that's really a great way to kind of have that all that information in there, and is really, really helpful. So workbook is the file, worksheet are all those different tabs. A cell is the rectangle or the block that houses a worksheet. So the cell are those little rectangles within the document or the file. And then columns and rows is how it's set up. And the rows will go down numerically and the columns go across alphabetically. I have not seen any time when Excel says you can't add any more spreadsheets and you can't add any more columns, because once you get to Z, then you'll go to AA and AB and AC. So it will keep building on. And I don't know how infinity it will go to, but I've not seen it stop yet. So here's sort of what an Excel sheet might look like when you open it up. And again, you have your file name there, and this XLSX dot there at the top under file name. That's what you would name your workbook. So when I do my balance sheet, I always worry that I've corrupted something that happened previously. So I will update it for each year. I will rename a new one on the date that I did it. So if I create a new balance sheet on January 5th of 2020, I'll name it balance sheet underscore 2020. And it'll still have all of that information in there, but I'll know when it was last updated. I could also put that date into the worksheet when I save it. But you want to do a file name that you'll remember. And again, that's your workbook. This is the ribbon. So you go across the top and there's lots of different things to, categorize your numbers in there, your numerical numbers. You can put your formulas in, you can insert. I've used find and select quite a bit, but you can go across the top, and that's very similar to the other Microsoft products. You can do the name box here. So C4, you can see what's highlighted here is the C4. And then the formula bar is where you have the actual formula. So they're taking A4 divided by A5. All right. Or it looks like, no, they're adding. I'm sorry, 5 plus 2 is the 7 there. So they've got an addition. And I like using the cells to do that. Some people might put in there equals 5 plus 2. But if you change the 5 or 2, that formula won't update. So I do often like using the cell reference as opposed to typing in the numerical number. The nice thing about the cell reference too is once I do that, I can drag. So you see the drag or fill handle, I can drag that down and it will copy that formula all the way down, which is really, again, anybody that's used paper and pencil and calculator, this is just so much quicker. So I'm going to share some examples of these different types of farm records. There's tons of different templates or ways that you might use them. So the three basic types I like to categorize them to is your resource inventories. So that's kind of keeping your inventory and a good list of what you have. It's your production accounts. Maybe it's your livestock production information. Maybe it's your crop and yield information. Maybe it's your marketing information. And then, of course, it's your financial, which is your income and expense records. I like to say that you can keep records on anything, and I'll show one example of anything in here. I could keep a record today of how long my commute takes every day to work, but am I going to use that? Is that beneficial for some reason? I can keep record of, how long does it take me to do my book work every week? You can keep records on anything. You just really need to decide what's going to help you for compliance reasons or reporting reasons, and what's going to help you make decisions on the farm. What do you need to know? So your resource inventories help you kind of keep a good inventory of the resources and equipment on your farm. The resources include your assets, and those are items that you own, and liabilities are items that you owe for. And it's really helpful when you're doing your balance sheet. So most lenders want that balance sheet each year when they're doing your line of credit, or you're looking at a loan, or you have an open um, account there at the bank. So that's really helpful in having that information. It's really good for a summary of collateral, so you can show them what you own and what their value is, as well as with your insurance company. So you've got a listing of all your equipment right there. It's great for computing non-cash expenses, maybe like depreciation, and it can really help you with taxes, again, insurance, and then making those purchase decisions. Is it, can I afford new? Should I get used? What is older? What is newer? And to make those types of decisions. So here is an example of a couple of spreadsheets that we've used in the past. Um, the top one here is an equipment inventory, and we have the equipment name, the model, the size, the year we purchased it, the condition of it, are we owning it or releasing it, what's the book value, what is the market value. You might want to add the tag number if it's vehicles, a VIN number, anything that you need as you're working with, transportation, departments of transportation, and getting these things tagged and on the road. An ID number, or what you call that piece of equipment. But that type of equipment inventory and resource is really nice to have. I've seen this, and we have an example of this with buildings and sheds as well. If you have a number of pole barns, grain storage, anything like that on the farm, that might also be helpful, because when you look at, again, appraisers, if you look at it, putting in for insurance, you've got the information. How many square feet? When was it built? Is there an appraisal value on it? A lot of people will take photos, especially for insurance things. The bottom spreadsheet is an example of listing out the equipment, what the cost is, what the expected life is, and giving it a per year charge. So what we do with this is we've used this as we're doing our crop budgets. So an example is if I'm looking at the field equipment and I'm looking at this tractor and loader, I can take and multiply it out over time. I can take the $1,167 and I can divide that out through the crops. So these are like your fixed expenses. When you think about variable costs and fixed costs, this is a way to look at your variable cost, or your fixed costs, and put a charge on those depending on your crops. And I'll show kind of how we divide that up in our enterprise budgets when we get to the financial section. So here was a really easy way to show how we used Excel with the formula. Under the per year charge, I would do equals, and the equal sign is very, very important in Excel, because that tells Excel this person is getting ready to do a formula. I need to do some math. So if I do it equals and I type, I select the B4 divided by C4, it's going to give me that per year charge. So it's the cost divided by expected life. You can see I use headings here. This is really important to be able to understand the unit that you were using or titling it. So it's really, really helpful to have these headings, and that way you're organized. This is another one that you might do. So we talked about what we have, right? So we talked about all the equipment we have. What about what we want, our Christmas list? So here is the projected equipment schedule. This is one that we did for a case study that we had. And what we did was we listed out, okay, well, what we would like to do is, add to the farm. We're always going to be updating equipment and things that we need on the farm. So when is our ideal that we would want to purchase it? And this, again, helps with planning. So you can see we put a cash cost, the piece of equipment, the cash cost of it, the purchase date that we wanted to, and then down at the bottom where we've highlighted, I was able to do the equal sign and I went through for each of them. So I found all the 2007s and I summed them up. So I added them together. I found the 2008s and I added them together. So, as I change things, that those formulas would update. So that's a way to use a resource inventory looking forward. For production records, again, they're used to measure and report performance of crop and livestock enterprises. So what type of crop records might you include or use? Perhaps it's soil conditions, it's field layouts, it's building locations, maybe it's your crop rotation or varieties that you've used. Those might be rows that you would want to add in. Those might be columns so you can have that information. Perhaps it's yields over time, fertilizer rates, pesticide applications. In Maryland, we have to keep records on all of those things. For livestock records, again, if you've got a breeding program, very, very important. With the poultry farms, we have to keep a section for mortality and how many birds, they pick up every day so they can keep that mortality record. What is their performance and what type of feed information? There's also labor records. And so, there's might be amounts or timing required per operation. Perhaps you have employees. Perhaps it's time in the car because, you can keep track of mileage and that type of thing. Or perhaps it's an inventory or market records. So you go to farmers markets and you have quantities carried over from year to year. So, I have honey. Well, there's a value in that honey from 2019 to 2020. So I would want to keep a record of the quantities carried over in my inventory. Things that are left for sale. Maybe it's sales records that I want to keep. Maybe it's customer records. People who are direct marketing, they need to know how to get in touch with their customers. Is it, emails? Is it mailing lists? Is it that type of thing that they want to keep records of? And again, lots of reasons why to keep those, making those decisions, meeting regulatory requirements, meeting insurance requirements. All of those could be helpful. All right, so we got some more examples. And this is one that doesn't actually include numbers. It's all text. It could easily add in projections. So maybe it's quantities that we would want to add in here. Maybe I'd want to do some color coding or shading. So it's a similar one here. This is a crop schedule, and a lot of the farmers markets use this to help tell their consumer this is when the crops will be available throughout the year. So you see the crop listed, you see the month listed, and then they're shaded of when that crop would be available. So again, a very good visual idea of when the crops would be available, and Excel does this very, very well. Here's some sample sheets for grain crops that we use. And both of these are for, let's see, the one that's colored here looks at it's color coded by the farm. So we have a farm with multiple fields in it. So we've got a farm number and then the tract numbers, the acreage in each of those, what the crop was grown, and then what the fertilizer rates were. Here in Maryland, it's important that we report on nutrient management. So we need to tell the state how many acres were grown of each crop and what the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium were put down on the various crops. And so it's really, really important that those type of records are kept. This other example here is grain tickets. So up at the top, you have the grain ticket number, what farm it came off of, what crop it was, the number of bushels, the price, and then I have the acreage there. So then we can get, number one, yield, and then I can also run it and say, okay, what was the average price received for the crops? And so you can see how easy it would be just to type that in with your keypad and then make the totals here. So fertility and yield reports, Excel makes it really easy. So what I would probably do is have a workbook that said fertility and yield reports. And then I would have set up in that workbook multiple worksheets for each year. So 2019 fertility, 2019 marketing, 2018 fertility, 2018 marketing. And that's how I would, again, organize that in that workbook. This is an example of feed consumption in a poultry house. So this individual has 4 poultry houses, and you can see they have the data here on the right with their daily readings of the poultry houses. And then you can see feed consumption. You know, it's going to go up, of course, right? Because the birds are growing, they're going to be eating more. But this individual kept records every day on what the birds were eating, and then he was able to have that and report that and make decisions on it, see which houses were doing better, which houses were needing more feed, which weren't. And so again, you can see how you could use the data in the cells to do some totals, but then also graphically to see how it changes over time. So again, this is just a summary of some of the ways that you might want to keep production records. Again, as you're thinking about, production schedule, crop insurance, yields are really important for crop insurance and having that information. Any certifications, so if you're certified organic, you need to have reporting. If you fall under the Food Safety Modernization Act, you're keeping records that are really important. Perhaps it's sales because you're at a farmer's market and you're trying to make a decision, do I come back here this year or not? So you're keeping those type of records. Perhaps it's, how much water are you using? How much electric are you using? It's the temperatures. Maybe it's projections versus actuals, and enterprise budgets and inventories. All right, we're going to move. So we've gone from your resource inventories, your production inventories, and given some examples. Now we talk about financial records, and I think that's probably the thing that comes to the top of people's mind when they think about Excel is keeping those finances or having the numbers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these various financial forms. And what I like about Excel is that you can break them into additional categories if you need to. So, there might be an example that you're going to use for insurance, but you've got home insurance, farm insurance, auto insurance, liability, that type of things. Or maybe you're going to organize it by the type of crops that you have on your farm. So those that hear my financial presentations, I usually always talk about enterprise budgets. They're really a great basis to start with, and they don't necessarily need to be crop budgets. I've seen budgets for custom hay operations. I've seen it for livestock operations, but it's a great way to really get your expenses related to your crop organized in a very organized fashion, so then you can complete the other financial forms that are needed. This is a vineyard in year 1, so we don't have much of a yield yet. You can see what the variable costs are. Those are expenses related to that crop. And then we have our fixed and overhead costs. So those are costs that are that we have to pay whether we get a crop or we put a crop in or not. So that would be some of the building expenses, machinery expenses, the mortgage, those type of things. You would try to figure out, could you assign a value to that fixed cost to give to the vineyard for that year? Okay, so that per acre charge for that year. In this example, we're using custom rates. That's often what we'll use for the fixed cost. So an example is, like, I have fertilizer application. So it doesn't mean the cost of the fertilizer. What that means is it's the cost of the labor and the equipment to apply the fertilizer. And when we look at our crop budgets, we do these each year for our grain crops. And so we have a lot of historical information over time. and you can see this cost per acre as you go through the different crops. So the top graph shows it in a per acre for each crop. And then the bottom graph shows the breakdown in that enterprise budget of the different expenses. So my question, once I graph it, if you look at the gray line, which is fertilizer, you can see 2013 really dipped. So what I ended up doing was going back to just 2013 data and saying, what changed in this? What modifications did we make with the fertilizer? Did we use something different? What was going on there? And so that's one of the reasons why I really like graphing it is you might pick up on an error that you didn't necessarily have before. I mentioned the balance sheet a couple times. Again, it's generally a financial document that's completed at a certain time. So this is a snapshot in time of the assets and liabilities and the net worth of a business. Again, these are really great to do annually at the same time of year, because that really gives you a true picture. So if you do it, the end of, December 31st of every year, or the end of December, beginning January of every year, you really can get a snapshot over time of how the net worth of the farm changes. The cash flow is also important. And again, over time, as you create these, and your first year, your budget might not be great. Your cash flow might be way off. But the more you do these, and the more you're comfortable with the numbers and what the numbers mean and look like, the more accurate they're going to become. And so what this cash flow is, it looks at what last year's was and what our projected is for the additional years. And these cash flow budgets are really impossible to create without records. So, how would you know your labor hired without other records? Or how would you know your repairs and maintenance without other records that you've kept? Same with, your different crops that are here, so greens or berries. You really need additional data and records to complete a cash flow statement. So I mentioned how great, going online is. I've watched YouTube tutorials on how to do things. I've gone to the templates. If you click new, you can go to the templates office, and you can download all kinds of things. So say you want a timesheet, or say you need some travel forms. A lot of those business type things, what do they have? Back to school planner. I mean, they have all kinds of things on here that you can at least get a template for. You can also search around and find other types of templates that you can download, but this is really a really helpful way to get started. So in Excel, really, I like using it because it really can help you get organized. You can use formulas, and you can manipulate them and copy them and update them. So what's really nice is, say my cash flow, I want to change different things. If I have all my formulas in there, I can see how little changes impact my bottom line. Same with the enterprise budgets. Perhaps I need to look at less expensive seed, or I change the population, so I need less transplants. So that type of thing is helpful. Help always works, and I mentioned weighted average before. I always have to look that equation up, and so the new Excel, you can just type right in there in the top bar, tell me what you want to do, and I'll type in weighted average, and it will tell me how to type in that equation. Create workbooks with worksheets. So you can see in here, I've got multiple years that I use. So I have summary, 2014, 2015, and on. A lot of times I will save them as the date that I do it, and I update it. So an example is, I have all these worksheets, and I have all these old files, but I'm always wanting to make sure that I have the most recent file. And so a lot of times if I save it, I will save it as the day that I update it. Copy functions work great. And the filter function, so this little like weird caret thing here, I use it a lot for my headings. So I'll create these headings and then I will highlight them, create the filter, and then I can move things around depending, maybe I want to search by last name. Maybe I want to search by email address. Maybe I want to search by a certain quantity. Um, I can do it that way. And then we've talked a little bit about graphing. So some tips to setting up a spreadsheet, find a template to start with, and you might want to look at some of the ones that you do download, they have some protected cells, so you might not be able to change them as much as you want, but you could at least download a template and kind of start tracking and playing around with it and see if it's working for you. Is it something that you'll use? Is it usable data that you can use to make decisions on the farm? Creating it for the first time is the hardest. Once you get sort of a system in place, generally the first year or the first spreadsheet is the most difficult. Then when I come back in year two, I can kind of copy and paste and add in and make tweaks as I need to. Preparation and organization of the spreadsheet sometimes can be the hardest. How do you want it to look? How do you want it set up? So think about that. And again, if you're just kind of using it a little bit, that can help you figure out, well, if I get 200 cells, 200 rows of data, how will I use that and how will I want it organized? There might be some labeling that you want to do with it. And then create it with a future in mind. So think about, think about row 200 compared to row 10 when you're doing that. And an example is I mentioned logging into my bank account and downloading I download for my taxes my entire year in transactions, which is huge when you think about, debits and grocery visits and all the other things that happen throughout the year. And so that's a huge file. So then I create additional columns so I can sort of start to label what those different transactions are. All right. Well, it looks like we have that's it for today about Excel. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone had. There's a number of great resources online. A lot of these templates that I shared are at the Maryland Rural Enterprise Development Center, and I can add them into the website when I upload the slides. All these slides will be available as well as the recording within the next 24 hours. It depends on how long the recording takes to download to YouTube. So any questions, feel free to add them in the chat pod. If you'd like to see some additional Excel, is it Excel mechanics, using Excel itself? Is it example templates? I'd be very interested in hearing what people thought they would like to see in an Excel type presentation. So a great time of year to start getting Excel spreadsheets together, the end of the reporting season, and everybody's starting to look at their data from yield to sales and everything else. The best resource for learning how to use Excel, that's a great question. And I think just getting in there and using it, if you have a local community college, a lot of them have Excel on their computers, and so you can take some classes and getting comfortable with it. It can be very frustrating moving things around. What I like about math is you can always check your work. So if there's a couple of things that you don't think the equations are working right, oftentimes I'll kind of do the reverse equation to see what's wrong there, so you can check your work, which is nice in Excel. But I think the one thing is having it and starting to keep that information in the spreadsheet itself. Perhaps it's creating a spreadsheet on paper and sort of graphing it out, charting out what you want your Excel workbook to look like on paper. All right, so sample templates would be awesome. Okay, yep. And what I find is there's some great templates out there, and then for farms, we need to tweak them all the time because every farm is so different, and they're keeping it tracking so many different things. So a template's a great start, and then tweak it as you need it. Okay, I'm just reading through the emails here. Yeah, I don't know about, I would want to purchase, there's a deal on Excel bundle. Yeah, I don't know. I would want to purchase from Microsoft directly. I don't know what that is. And the other thing is, what you'll be putting in Excel could be very private information. So be careful where you're saving these things, who has access to them, and that type of thing. And so, whether, it's, I mean, a lot of people keep Excel spreadsheets of passwords and account numbers and things that they don't want out there publicly. So I would just be very, very careful of the security piece of it in what I do share. Um, Definitely. If I was going to play around with it and not put any private information in, Google has Google Sheets, and I think that's free. And it's much like Excel. It doesn't offer all the bells and whistles of Excel. I think it's much clunkier to use, but at least kind of has, and you can, of course, download it to Excel, but that might be a good way to practice if you didn't want to purchase the software. Oh, free online classes with a local library. That's great. Yes, that might be a great resource as well. Good question about the slides and templates. You will get an email. So you will get an email from Eventbrite. So everyone that registered today, I will send them the link when everything has been posted. So you should be getting an email. Hopefully, sometimes it goes to spam, but Eventbrite will send you that the recording is now available. Can you demonstrate some of the Excel mechanics of manipulating a balance sheet to make decisions on the farm? That's a great question, and the balance sheet probably wouldn't be something you would manipulate as much unless you're trying to change your net worth. Okay, so um, um, assets are what you own, and the value of things that you have. Liabilities are what you owe. So what I like to look at is that net worth. That say it's a mortgage that I've paid a car off, or I've paid a credit card off. So I look year to year at how my net worth changes. And so to me, the balance sheet really, it's a great measurement of your uh, financial health and your lending ability. I think the manipulating piece I would use would be somewhere like the crop budgets. So I would make some decisions maybe based on those. I could change the yield around. What ifs? Okay, so what if I you know I added more plants, or what if what were my additional costs going to be? Okay, so if I add more plants, I'm going to increase my need for nitrogen, fertilizer, herbicides, that type of thing. So I can make decisions on that. What if I don't get the yield that I want? What if I don't get the price that I want? What if I get more than what I want? So you can, mostly it's here in this quantity and price that you can sort of manipulate. So what if I can bulk purchase a product, and I can make changes in that, or spraying schedule? The other place that you can really help make decisions would be this cash flow. So this is where I would use this to make decisions on the farm. Huge decision is hire labor. Okay, labor is expensive. Dealing with employees is frustrating, but a lot of people, especially small farmers, are trying to make that decision. Do I want to add employees? And so what would that cost be? And so you could play around with that cost. Perhaps it's marketing, okay? I need new signage, or I'd like to get additional, uh, I'd like to run some ads or boost some Facebook pages. We also have like family living and withdrawals here. So, are they going to go down or go up? So the cash flow budget, and especially since these are projections, so the idea is that you have what you did last year and then what your projections are. This one to me is one of the biggest ones where you can really look at what the farm can afford. I hope that answered your question. Um, and those decisions are only as good as the data that you have in here. And I do think that the more that you run these numbers and you're comfortable with these numbers and you're continuing to make projections, the better you're going to be, the more accurate your numbers are going to be. The first year you're going to be like, I don't know, it might be this, it might be that. And I know it's really, really hard. I work with a lot of beginning farmers. It's really, really hard to assign numbers to certain things. But the best thing to do is to put a value out there, at your best estimation, and then tweak it year after year. And then, you know, I'm in awe of the farmers that know exactly. I mean, farmers know exactly what it costs them to go to a market or to sell a bushel or an acre of, or a head, or a pound of meat or a dozen eggs. I mean, they know that answer. All right.